To be loved by Julian Croft was to live in the sun. He was warm and bright, and the world seemed to revolve around him. Our love story felt like a classic, the kind people write books about. I was Isabel Sterling, a sharp, ambitious corporate lawyer who had built my own small life with meticulous care. He was the heir to the Croft real estate empire, a man who moved through the world with the easy, unshakable confidence of someone who has never been told no. We met, we fell. And the world went from black and white to brilliant, dazzling color. I loved him not for his name or his money, but for the man I believed him to be. For the way he'd listen, truly listen, when I talked about the intricacies of contract law. For the way he'd pull me out of my office, insisting we go for a walk in the park because my brain was overheating. He saw me, I thought. He saw past the lawyer and saw the woman, and I, in turn, was ready to embrace his world. The sprawling, powerful dynasty of the Croft family. His father, a titan of industry. His mother, a doyen of society. His older sister Elizabeth, the coup of the empire, sharp and intimidating. They were a formidable, glittering constellation, and I was about to become one of them. The wedding was planned to be the event of the season. 1,000 guests, a cathedral, a reception in a ballroom with a ceiling painted to look like the heavens. It was all a bit much for me, a woman who preferred clean lines and quiet elegance, but it was what the Crofts did. They didn't just celebrate, they made statements, and I was happy to go along with it, because it made Julian happy. My real passion, the project that consumed my nights and weekends, was the boutique hotel. It was Julian's passion project, the first development he was heading up on his own. A chance to prove himself outside of his father's long shadow. He called it our project from the beginning. I was his sounding board, his partner, his secret weapon. When the initial contracts were a mess, I was the one who spent a week pro bono rewriting them, saving him from a legal nightmare. When the architectural plans hit a zoning snag, I was the one who found the loophole in the city code. I sketched out ideas for the lobby bar on cocktail napkins. I reviewed linen samples. I helped interview chefs. The hotel was a beautiful, intricate structure we were building together, a testament to our partnership. My love for him was poured into the mortar and sealed in the walls of that rising building. I was so blinded by the sun of his love, so invested in the beautiful blueprint of our future, that I didn't see the storm gathering on the horizon. I didn't see that while I was building a partnership, his family was assessing a risk. I didn't understand that in their world, love was a liability, and I, the successful, independent woman with a career of her own, was the biggest liability of all. The warning came just 1 week before the wedding, not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet, chilling click of a briefcase opening in a sterile, airless boardroom. The meeting was Julian's idea, just a quick chat with my father and Elizabeth, he'd said, his tone casual, almost breezy, just to go over some final details before the wedding, a little family business. I thought nothing of it. I assumed it was about the seating chart or some last-minute vendor issue. I walked into the Croft Corporation boardroom, on the 50th floor, the city sprawling beneath us, feeling like a partner, an equal. I was wearing a white dress, a nod to our impending nuptials. It was a mistake. I should have worn armor. My father-in-law-to-be, Richard Croft, sat at the head of the massive mahogany table. He was a man who seemed to be carved from granite and disapproval. Elizabeth, my future sister-in-law, sat at his right hand, her expression a cool, polished mask of indifference. Her eyes, so like Julian's, held none of his warmth. They were chips of ice. Julian sat beside me, but he didn't take my hand. He just stared at the folder placed neatly in front of him. Isabel, Richard began, his voice the low rumble of undisputed authority. We are all very happy to be welcoming you into the Croft family. The words were a formality devoid of any actual warmth. And as you know, with a family like ours, there are certain practicalities to consider. We believe in protecting the legacy we have built. He nodded to Julian, my fiancé. The love of my life slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished table towards me. His hand was shaking slightly. He wouldn't meet my eyes. What is this? I asked, my voice a little tight, a knot of unease forming in my stomach. It's the prenup, Elizabeth said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was as sharp and cold as her eyes. Standard procedure, I'm sure, as a lawyer. You understand. Oh, I understood. I understood the power play, the corporate chill of the room, the deliberate choice of venue. This wasn't a family discussion. This was a business negotiation, and I was the opposing counsel. I opened the folder, my hands steady, my lawyer's mask slipping into place. My heart, however, was starting to pound a slow, panicked rhythm against my ribs. I began to read. And with every clause, with every sentence, the floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. This was not a standard prenup. A standard agreement protects pre-existing assets. I had no issue with that. I had my own career, my own savings. I wasn't after the Croft family fortune. This document was something else entirely. It was a weapon. It was an insult. It was a declaration of war disguised as a legal document. It demanded I waive any and all rights, not just to existing family assets, but to any appreciation of those assets during our marriage. It stipulated that any increase in Julian's personal wealth, even if I was a contributing factor to his success, would remain his sole and separate property. It stated that any gifts given to me by Julian or his family would be considered mere loans, revertible upon their request. But the final, crushing blow, the clause that sucked all the air from my lungs and left me cold and hollow, was the one about intellectual property. It was a long, convoluted paragraph, but its meaning was brutally clear. It stated that any and all contributions, professional or personal, that I made to any Croft family business venture would be considered voluntary and without expectation of compensation. It specifically named the new boutique hotel project, our project, the one I had poured my heart, my soul, and hundreds of hours of my unbilled legal expertise into. The document was designed to do one thing: to strip me bare, to ensure that if our marriage failed, I would walk away with nothing but what I had come in with, to erase my contributions, my partnership, my very presence in his life and his business. It was a document that assumed my guilt, that presupposed my intention to be a gold digger. It wasn't protecting their legacy, it was neutering me. I looked up from the pages, my vision slightly blurred. I looked at the three faces watching me: Richard, impassive and cold; Elizabeth, a tiny, triumphant smirk playing on her lips; and Julian, my Julian. He was staring at his hands, his face a mask of shame and weakness. He had allowed this. He had agreed to this. The man I loved, the man I was going to marry in 7 days, saw me not as his partner, but as a hostile takeover, a threat to be neutralized. The love story, the beautiful fairy tale, dissolved in the harsh, fluorescent light of that boardroom. The sun I had been living in went out, and the world became a very cold, very quiet place. I closed the folder, the sound of the leather echoing in the silent room. I'll need some time to review this with my counsel, I said, my voice a perfect professional monotone. The lawyer had taken over. The woman, the fiancé, the lover, she was gone. And in her place was a cold, quiet fury that was more profound and more absolute than anything I had ever known. I walked out of that boardroom and into the elevator, my body moving with a strange, robotic calm. I nodded at the receptionist as I left the Croft Corporation building, a polite, meaningless smile fixed on my face. I hailed a cab, gave my address, and stared out the window at the city rushing by, seeing none of it. The real me, the Isabel who felt things, was 1,000 miles away, shattered into a million pieces. The lawyer was the one in control, a cold, efficient machine operating on pure, unadulterated shock. I let myself into my apartment, the one I was supposed to be packing up to move out of, and I locked the door behind me. I walked to the center of my living room, and I finally let the heavy, leather-bound prenup fall from my hands. It hit the hardwood floor with a soft, sickening thud, and then I broke. The sobs came from a place so deep inside me I didn't recognize it. They were ragged, ugly, gut-wrenching sounds of a heartbreak so total it felt like a physical death. I crumpled to the floor, my arms wrapped around myself, as wave after wave of pain washed over me. Every memory of Julian, every shared laugh, every tender moment, was now tainted, poisoned by the cold, cruel words of that document. He had called me his partner, his secret weapon, his equal, all of it, a lie, while I was dreaming of our future. He and his family were drafting a contract to protect themselves from me. I wasn't a bride. I was a business risk. The insult was so profound, so deeply personal. It felt like it was unwriting my very DNA. They had looked at my love, my success, my independence, and they had seen a threat. They had seen a gold digger. I cried until I was empty, until there were no tears left. I lay on my floor for hours, the afternoon sun fading to a gray twilight outside my windows. The initial, hot agony of the heartbreak began to cool, crystallizing into something else. Something hard and sharp and cold. It was rage. But it wasn't a screaming, thrashing rage. It was a quiet, methodical, lawyerly rage. It was the kind of rage that doesn't yell. It builds a case. I pushed myself up from the floor. I walked into my kitchen and poured a large glass of water, my hand steady. I picked up the prenup from the floor. My fingers no longer trembling, I took it to my desk, my home office, my sanctuary of logic and reason. I turned on my lamp, its clean, bright light illuminating the pages. I started to read it again, but not as a wounded fiancé. I read it as a lawyer. I read it as an adversary, and as I read, my analytical mind began to see the cracks. The document was brutal, but it was also arrogant. It was so focused on protecting their future assets that it had completely overlooked my past contributions. It had, in its own cruel text, admitted that I had been involved in the hotel project. It had tried to dismiss my work as voluntary, but in doing so, it had acknowledged its existence. They had made a fatal error. They had underestimated me. They assumed I was a lovesick fool who would be so desperate to marry into their dynasty that I would sign away my dignity. They thought they were dealing with a blushing bride. They had forgotten they were dealing with a damn good lawyer. A plan began to form in my mind, a strategy so audacious, so theatrical, so utterly ruthless that it made me feel a giddy, terrifying thrill. They wanted a war, fine. But I wouldn't fight it on their terms, in their boardroom. I would choose the battlefield, and I would choose the time. They wanted me to sign the prenup. I would sign it. They wanted a wedding. I would give them a wedding. I would walk down that aisle. I would smile for their cameras. I would play the part of the compliant, broken-in bride. I would lull them into a false sense of security. Let them believe they had one, that they had successfully domesticated the threat, but I wouldn't be preparing for a marriage. I would be preparing for a trial. I would spend the next week not writing vows, but drafting a lawsuit so airtight, so meticulously documented, so explosive that it would detonate in the middle of their perfect, thousand-guest wedding. It would turn their society event of the season into a public relations nightmare. They wanted to protect their legacy. I was going to sue them for a piece of it. A piece I had already earned. I sat at my desk, the harsh light of the lamp on my face, and I began to type. The first document I created was not a list of wedding guest favors. It was a timeline of every email, every meeting, every late-night phone call related to the hotel project. The transformation was complete. The heartbroken fiancé was dead. In her place was a lawyer with a case to win, and my client, for the first time in my life, was me. The phone call to Julian was the performance of a lifetime. I let a full day pass, a day of silence to let them sweat, to let him believe I might actually walk away. When I finally called him, I pitched my voice to the perfect frequency of wounded but willing. I was heard, yes. But my love for him was stronger. It was a narrative he wanted desperately to believe. Julian, I said, my voice a carefully constructed whisper of manufactured emotion. I've read it, Izzy. He breathed, his relief palpable even through the phone line. I'm so sorry. I know it's harsh. It wasn't my idea. It was my father. You know how he is, the classic excuse. The cowardly retreat behind the monolith of his father's authority. I almost laughed. Instead, I played my part. It's a lot to process, Julian, I said, letting a little tremble enter my voice. It feels like you don't trust me. Of course I trust you, he insisted. His voice earnest and pleading. I love you. This is just business, a formality. It doesn't change anything between us. Please, Izzy, don't let them ruin this. Don't let them win them. He was already positioning his family as the antagonists, with us as the tragic lovers caught in the middle. It was a brilliant, if cowardly, strategy, and I let him believe it was working. Okay, I sighed, a long martyred exhalation. Okay, Julian, for you, for us, I'll sign it. The wave of his relief was so powerful it almost knocked me over. He was ecstatic, promising to make it all up to me, promising that once we were married, things would be different. He was a fool, a handsome, charming, weak-willed fool. And he was walking right into my trap. The next morning, I had the prenup signed in front of a notary and messengered over to the Croft Corporation offices. The message was clear. The compliant bride had fallen in line. The threat was neutralized. The wedding was on. Elizabeth called me that afternoon, her voice dripping with a victorious, condescending sweetness. "I'm so glad. We could get that all sorted out, Isabel. It's for the best. Now we can all focus on the wonderful celebration ahead." "Oh, we will," I thought, "but we'll be celebrating very different things." My apartment transformed. The wedding planning binders were pushed to a corner. My dining room table became a war room. I began the meticulous, obsessive work of building my case. For years, I had lived by the mantra of billable hours. Now, I was billing my own heartbreak. I went through my emails, searching for every correspondence related to the hotel project. I printed them all, hundreds of pages. Emails where Julian had written, "Izzy, my legal genius, can you look at this lease agreement? I'm lost." Emails where he'd forwarded me architectural drafts, asking for my opinion on the flow and functionality of the space. Emails where I had sent him detailed, multi-page memos outlining potential zoning issues and suggesting solutions. I dug up my old sketch pads. In them, I found the cocktail napkin I'd saved. The one where I had first sketched the layout for the rooftop bar, a design they were now using. I had the original contracts I had rewritten, saved on my hard drive with time-stamped metadata proving I had been the one to edit them. I had text messages, voicemails, a mountain of digital evidence that painted a crystal-clear picture of my integral, professional role in the hotel's development. I was not just a supportive fiancé, I was an uncredited, unpaid, essential consultant. I had saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. I had contributed creative and strategic ideas that were now part of the hotel's core concept. The prenup sought to erase that work. My lawsuit would bring it into the harsh, unforgiving light of day. I drafted the complaint myself. It was a work of art. My masterpiece of legal fury. It detailed, with chilling precision, every single contribution I had made. It cited precedents in intellectual property law, in quantum merit, in unjust enrichment. I wasn't just suing for my time. I was suing for the value I had created. I was demanding punitive damages for their bad faith attempt to steal my work. The final number I typed onto the page was audacious, shocking. It was a number designed to make them choke. It was a number that would make headlines. I hired a process server, a discreet ex-cop named Mike who had a flair for the dramatic. I met him in a coffee shop far from my usual haunts. "I have a job for you," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "I need you to serve this lawsuit to the defendant at a specific time and place." He opened the folder, his eyebrows raising as he read the details. He looked up at me, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. "At the altar," he said, a low whistle escaping his lips, "Lady, you've got style. I'll have to charge you extra for the tux rental. Consider it a bonus," I said. The plan was in motion. The pieces were all in place. All I had to do now was survive the next few days. I had to attend my own bridal shower, smile through the rehearsal dinner, and write my own wedding vows, all while knowing I was preparing not for a lifetime of love, but for a single, spectacular moment of detonation. I was a bride walking toward a wedding that would never be completed. I was a lawyer walking toward the case of her life. The bridal shower was a surreal exercise in hypocrisy. It was hosted by Elizabeth at the Croft family estate, a place of suffocating, old money elegance. I sat in a ridiculously ornate armchair, surrounded by a sea of pastel-clad women, and opened gifts I would never use in a home I would never share with their son. "Oh, Isabel, it's exquisite," my future mother-in-law, Catherine, would gush as I unwrapped a set of hideous, gold-plated serving spoons. "You'll be a wonderful hostess." I would smile, a perfect, serene smile I had practiced in the mirror. "Thank you, Catherine, it's lovely." All the while, I was mentally reviewing paragraph 7 of my lawsuit, the section on fraudulent misrepresentation. Elizabeth was the queen of the affair, gliding through the room, her smile as brittle and expensive as the porcelain teacups. She pulled me aside at one point, her hand a cold weight on my arm. "I'm so glad you came to your senses, Isabel," she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "The prenup, it's just better for everyone. It keeps things clean." "Of course, Elizabeth," I said, my smile never wavering. "Clarity is so important in any partnership. She thought she was talking to the defeated, / the tamed. The little lawyer who had been put in her place. She had no idea she was speaking to the architect of her family's impending public humiliation. The knowledge was a secret, delicious power. It was the armor beneath my borrowed compliance. My best friend and maid of honor, a razor-sharp litigator named Anya, was the only one who saw the cracks in my facade. She had been watching me all day. Her eyes narrowed with a worried suspicion. Later that evening, back in my apartment, she confronted me. "Okay, Izzy, what's going on?" she demanded, blocking my path to the kitchen. "You were a zombie at that shower, a smiling, polite, perfectly dressed zombie. I know you, and I know that after what Julian pulled. You should be a wreck or furious or something. You're not something. You're nothing. It's creeping me out." I hesitated. I had planned to go through this alone, to protect her from the fallout, but looking at her fierce, loyal face, I knew I couldn't. I needed an ally. I needed a witness. I walked over to my desk and picked up a copy of the lawsuit. I handed it to her. "I'm not a zombie," I said. "I'm a plaintiff." Anya read the first page, her eyes widening. She read the second, and her jaw dropped. By the time she got to the part about the process server at the altar, she sank onto my sofa, the papers trembling in her hand. "Oh my God, Izzy," she whispered, her voice a mixture of horror and awe. "You are going to burn them to the ground." They handed me the matches, I said. She looked at me, a slow, wicked grin spreading across her face. "This is the most gloriously, terrifyingly brilliant legal strategy I have ever seen. I am so proud of you, and also a little scared of you." She stood up, her eyes blazing with a sudden, fierce energy. "Okay, we need to prep you. This isn't just a legal filing, it's a performance. What are you going to say? We need to write your lines." And so, my maid of honor became my co-counsel. We spent the next 2 nights not addressing wedding invitations, but preparing for a trial. We wargamed the entire scenario. We wrote my speech, honing every word for maximum impact. It had to be clear, concise, and devastating. It had to leave no room for misinterpretation. It had to paint me not as a scorned woman, but as a wronged professional seeking justified compensation. The rehearsal dinner was the final hurdle. It was held at a Michelin-starred restaurant that Richard Croft practically owned. I sat next to Julian, playing the part of the adoring fiancé. He held my hand under the table, his thumb stroking my knuckles. He thought it was a gesture of love. To me, it felt like a defendant trying to curry favor with the judge. Richard Croft stood up to make a toast. "To Julian and Isabel," he said, raising his glass. "A perfect merger of 2 wonderful families. May their future be as prosperous and well-managed as a Croft development." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I smiled, raised my glass, and met his gaze across the table. "You have no idea what's coming," my eyes said. He just smiled back, oblivious, triumphant. He thought he had managed me. He thought he had won. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between a merger and a hostile takeover. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for a public execution. I felt a strange, preternatural calm, the kind that comes when you have a plan so absolute, so meticulously crafted, that there is no room left for doubt or fear. I was a soldier on the morning of a battle, my armor on, my weapon sharpened. My armor was a couture wedding gown of ivory silk, a dress that had cost more than my first car. My weapon was a single, folded piece of paper tucked into my maid of honor's bouquet, the speech Anya and I had perfected. The hotel suite where we were getting ready was a chaotic swirl of hairspray, champagne, and nervous energy. My mother was fluttering around, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "Oh, Isabel," she sighed, "I'm just so happy for you, to see you marry into such a wonderful family." She had no idea none of them did. They were all actors in my play, and they didn't even know their roles. Anya was my rock. She was a silent, steady presence, her eyes conveying a constant message of solidarity. As the hairdresser put the final pin in my hair, Anya leaned in close. "How are you feeling?" she whispered. "Ready," I said, my voice clear and even. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked like a bride, a beautiful, blushing, happy bride. The illusion was perfect. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, a character I was about to play, and she was about to give the performance of her life. The ride to the cathedral was silent. My father sat beside me in the vintage Rolls-Royce, looking proud and emotional. He patted my hand, "You're a good daughter, Isabel," he said. "You've made us all very proud." The hypocrisy of it all was almost comical. As we stood at the back of the cathedral, waiting for the massive wooden doors to open, I could hear the organ music swelling. I could hear the murmur of 1,000 guests. Anya gave my hand a final, firm squeeze. "Break a leg," she whispered. It was our old law school inside joke before a moot court competition. It had never felt more appropriate. The doors swung open, and I began my walk down the aisle. It was the longest walk of my life. A sea of faces turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of admiration and envy. I saw the members of the Croft family in the front pew, their faces smug and satisfied. They were watching their newest, most valuable asset being delivered. And then I saw Julian. He was standing at the altar looking impossibly handsome in his tuxedo. He was beaming, his eyes shining with what I knew he believed was love. As I reached him, he took my hand, his grip warm and possessive. He leaned in and whispered, "You look breathtaking." I looked into his eyes, the eyes of the man I had loved so deeply. The man who had so thoroughly and completely betrayed me, and I felt nothing, no love, no hate, just a profound, empty coldness. He was not my groom, he was my defendant, and court was now in session. We turned to face the officiant, a benevolent-looking old man, with a kind smile. The ceremony began. The traditional words washed over me, meaningless and distant. I was in a bubble of pure, cold focus, waiting for my cue. It came, / and now, the officiant said, beaming at us, "We come to the vows, the sacred promises that will bind these two hearts together for eternity." He turned to Julian. Julian began his vows, his voice thick with emotion, promising to love and honor and cherish me for all his days. It was a beautiful speech, full of lies. Then, the officiant turned to me. "And now, Isabel, do you have vows you would like to share with Julian?" This was it, the moment of detonation. I turned to face Julian. Anya subtly passed me the folded piece of paper. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The entire cathedral was silent, waiting. "I do have some words to share," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the small microphone clipped to the officiant's robes. "But they are not vows." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Julian's smile faltered. He looked at me, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "A week ago," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "Julian and his family presented me with a prenuptial agreement. An agreement that referred to my contributions to our shared business ventures as voluntary and without expectation of compensation. An agreement that sought to erase my partnership and define my love as a hostile takeover. An agreement that I, a lawyer, was expected to sign in order to prove my worthiness of marrying into the Croft family." The gasps were audible now. The guests were turning to look at the front pew, where Richard and Elizabeth Croft sat, their faces turning to stone. "I was told that this was standard procedure," I said, my eyes locking with Julian's. His face was ashen. He was starting to understand. "But I am here today to teach the Croft family a lesson about what is truly standard procedure when you attempt to commit intellectual property theft and fraud." I paused, letting the words hang in the air of the sacred space. "I will not be sharing vows today," I said, my voice ringing with a cold, hard finality. / instead. "I will be sharing a complaint, a legal complaint, to be precise." And on that cue, a man in a tuxedo stood up from the third pew. It was Mike, my process server. He began to walk calmly, deliberately, up the center aisle. All eyes were on him. He reached the altar, pulled a thick, folded document from his jacket pocket, and held it out to my fiancé, Julian Croft. He said, his voice loud and clear in the cavernous, silent church. "You've been served." The chaos that erupted in that cathedral was biblical. It was a symphony of gasps and shrieks, and the frantic, horrified murmuring of 1,000 of New York's high society elite flashbulbs, which had been held at bay by the decorum of the ceremony, began to pop like a sudden, violent hailstorm. The sacred, hallowed space had been transformed, in an instant, into a crime scene, a press conference, and the most spectacular, talked about implosion of the decade. Julian stood frozen, the thick legal document in his hand as if it were a venomous snake. His face, which had been pale with dawning horror, was now a mottled, ugly shade of red. He looked from the lawsuit to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of pure, unadulterated hatred and a kind of pathetic, bewildered disbelief. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The charming, confident air was gone. In his place was just a weak, spoiled boy who had been caught. Richard Croft was on his feet, his face a thunderous mask of fury. He was shouting, but his words were lost in the cacophony of the crowd. Elizabeth looked like she had seen a ghost, her perfect, polished composure shattered into a million pieces. My own parents were staring at me, their faces a perfect picture of shock and confusion. This was not the daughter they knew. I didn't wait for the fallout, my part was done. The bomb had been detonated. I turned, my ivory silk gown rustling around me, and I started my walk back down the aisle. It was a very different walk from the one I had made just minutes before. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, their faces a blur of astonishment. I kept my head held high, my expression serene, my gaze fixed on the massive wooden doors at the end of the aisle. I was not a jilted bride fleeing a scene. I was a lawyer leaving a courtroom, my case made, my closing argument delivered. Anya was waiting for me at the doors. She grabbed my hand, her eyes shining with a wild, fierce pride. "You absolute legend," she breathed. We pushed open the doors and stepped out into the bright, clear afternoon, leaving the chaos and the wreckage behind us. A getaway car which Anya had arranged was waiting at the curb. I got in, my wedding dress bunching up around me, and we drove away. I didn't look back. The lawsuit became the story of the year. The press had a field day, altercation, bride serves groom lawsuit instead of vows. The prenup war. How one lawyer took on a real estate dynasty. The details of the insulting prenup were leaked by my very efficient PR firm, and public opinion was squarely on my side. The Croft family, who had so carefully curated their image of power and integrity, were exposed as ruthless, greedy bullies. Their pristine reputation was in tatters. They tried to fight it, of course. They hired a team of the most expensive lawyers in the city. They issued statements calling my lawsuit frivolous and opportunistic, but my case was airtight. The evidence was undeniable. After 6 months of legal skirmishes, they settled. The amount was confidential, but it was staggering. It was more than enough to ensure I would never have to work for another corporation again. I didn't want their money for the sake of being rich. I wanted it as compensation. It was the salary they had refused to pay me, the value of the intellectual property they had tried to steal, and I used it to build my own empire. I founded Sterling Law, a boutique firm specializing in intellectual property and contract law for female entrepreneurs and artists. My story had made me a hero to women who had been underestimated, undervalued, and overlooked in the business world. They flocked to my firm, women with brilliant ideas, looking for someone who would fight for them, someone who understood their worth. My pain had become my purpose. My heartbreak had become my brand. I never spoke to Julian again. I heard he eventually married someone else, a woman from a family with an even older, more established fortune than his own, a woman who presumably signed the prenup without a fight. I felt nothing about it. He was a ghost, a character from a book I had read a long time ago. Sometimes, late at night in my own clean, elegant office, overlooking the city I now felt was truly mine, I would think about the woman in the white dress, the woman who had walked down that aisle, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. I didn't regret what I had done. It had been a necessary act of war, a reclamation of my own worth, but I mourned the woman I had been before, the one who had been capable of such a deep, trusting, all-encompassing love. That woman was gone forever, but the woman who had replaced her, the one who stood on her own, who built her own legacy, who fought for other women to do the same. I liked her, I respected her. She had lost the fairy tale, but she had won the kingdom. And it was a kingdom she had built with her own two hands.